Thank you for staying with us. This is still Report Desk Africa on News Central Television. Now let's talk journalism. Now, violence against journalists is on the rise and more attacks are threatening press freedom across the globe. United Nations statistics shows at least 74 journalists were killed in 2022, and most of the cases go unresolved. Attacks, harassment, intimidation, and criminalization of journalists have been escalating in East and Southern Africa for exposing allegations of corruption and human rights violation. In spite of the continuous calls to bring an end to all forms of impunity against journalists, we have continued to see threats of violence and attacks against journalists, creating a climate of fear for media professionals, hindering the free circulation of information, opinions, and ideas for all citizens. Now we'll take a quick look at this report put together apparently by myself, News Central journalist Bernard Akede. Do take a watch. In a bid to tell proper stories and balanced reportage, journalists often put themselves in harm's way. In some countries, press freedom, which should be non-negotiable, is still a topical issue. Between 2006 and 2023, over 1,600 journalists have been killed around the world, with close to 9 out of 10 cases of these killings remaining judicially unresolved, according to the UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists.
But in recent years, the number of media workers killed while investigating corruption, trafficking, and other human rights violations has risen. Almost 9 out of 10 of these killings go unpunished, and journalists face countless other threats, from kidnapping and torture to detention and harassment.
Between 1992 and 2023, 2,225 journalists and media workers have been killed globally. As of December 1st, 2022, 363 journalists imprisoned. And in the year 2023, 65 journalists have been reported missing. The COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of misinformation have demonstrated that access to information can be a matter of life and death, and threatening that access by targeting journalists sends a disturbing message that undermines democracy and the rule of law.
On the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, we call for justice for journalists killed in the line of duty and commemorate their legacy and achievements. I urge all member states to stand in solidarity with journalists and to investigate and prosecute crimes against them with the full force of the law.
Governments around the world are urged to create conducive working environments for journalists, while also ensuring that people who commit crimes against journalists are made to face the full wrath of the law. Bernard Akede, reporting for News Central.
Well, it's quite sad that journalists who have dedicated their lives to giving the truth to the people as they deserve face the threat of being killed, being kidnapped, being arrested, and being maimed, and very, very devastating situations like that. But anyways, joining us to discuss this very crucial matter is a veteran journalist and, of course, a senior broadcaster, Ibiyemi Olufowobi. Thank you, Ibiyemi, for joining us. All right, we just got to know that Ibiyemi will be joining us very shortly. But in the meantime, we also have a Kenyan broadcast journalist joining us, Vincent Ayako. Thank you, Vincent, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Vincent. Now, Vincent, you are a journalist in Kenya. So I would like to start with how being a journalist in Kenya feels like. How would you describe the level of press freedom that you enjoy, or the lack of it, by you and your colleagues in the country?
So first, I'd really like to applaud all the journalists in the world. And today we are commemorating World International Day of Ending Impunity and Crimes Against Journalists. So the journalist space is shrinking because of the emergence of technology, because you find that technology has now turned our geography into a community, and where traditionally people thought that the space where they operated, be it government officials, anybody else, the space has been reduced by technology. And as a result, you find journalists are living in a contemporary age of great confusion and also the great threat to their lives, because currently, especially when you look at the African context, the space with regards to exemplary leadership is really it's really to be questioned in terms of we are in desperate need and purposeful need of leaders full of character and integrity, and also the bit of covering the human rights violation and also the role of public accountability. These are threats that have made the lives of journalists to be at risk, because as they cover these stories, the guys who maneuver and find this space, take advantage of this space of their position, they tend to threaten the journalists, and also some of them, majority, have been killed as a result of trying to inform the public the ills that are happening.
Okay, now let's look at security operatives largely, because when we talk about threats to lives and property and to the works of journalists, apart from people who, the general people who threaten or who attack or intimidate journalists, there's the part of the security operatives who are supposed to be protecting lives and property, attacking journalists as well, particularly when they let themselves being used as tools of politicians or of politicking. Now, how does this play out in your country, and what are some of the would I say, some of the methods that journalists get to work around this or to work with the security operatives?
Yeah, actually, I have to admit that journalists in Kenya, work here is not very easy, because also Kenya, as compared to other countries, we are still grappling with issues of corruption and the need for leaders who are of exemplary leaders, because we find corruption is killing our nation. It's a scourge that is killing our nation. And you find that the security agencies, despite Kenya having a progressive constitution 2010, under Article 35 that dictates that we should be able to have freedom of access to information, to inform the public. So it's the role of the journalists to ensure that they inform the public with regards to what is happening. It doesn't matter how mighty you are in the land. If you are committing evils, if you are embezzling public funds, the people need to know. So you find some of the security agency, I'll not say all of them, but some of them have been used to propagate or to advance impunity against the journalists. Like, for instance, there is one case I'll mention here. One of the governors in Kenya that was involved in a love triangle with a young girl in one of the universities, in one of the colleges here in Kenya. And the girl was killed. Well, it's perceived it was killed by one of the governors. So one of the journalists who really was following that issue was significantly attacked by the security agencies who are supposed to protect this particular journalist and ensure that the lady who was killed, the family have been able to have access to justice. And then you find also in the shrinking democracy, if you look at Kenya, if you're keenly looking at the Kenya, just the recent election that happened, the people are really demonstrating. His Excellency President Ruto won with the 200,000 votes, defeated the main opponent, Raila Odinga, with 200,000 votes. So the people are demonstrating with regards to, yes, the Supreme Court was able to provide the ruling of that particular case. But one of the crucial things, the servers, to ascertain the authenticity of the data that was in the server. The server has not been opened up to now, and yet the Supreme Court ruled of the winner. So if you lead a room of doubt, then the people have a right to be agitated and also to demand for access to justice. So you find as the people are demonstrating and the journalists who are covering this demonstration, majority of journalists were attacked. Tear gas was lobbied inside a vehicle that was carrying the journalists. They were shot. Some of them were shot, tear gas, clobbered, arrested. So you find the security agencies, some of them are being used by the system of the day to be able to advance this particular impunity. I'll not say all of them, because they're also very good disciplined forces that do their work diligently and well, but they're also rogue officers who are used to propagate impunity against the journalists. As journalists, we are supposed to educate, not only to educate and to ridicule. We are also supposed, as we also advance, to entertain. We are also supposed to be the watchdog of the society, to be able to ensure that there is no impunity that is happening, there is no public embezzlement of public funds. So as journalists, not only here in Kenya, we feel threatened, and we also call upon the security agency and the governments of the day to be able to protect the rights of the journalists.
All right, thank you, Vincent, for that. Now, before we continue, we now have joining us veteran journalist and senior broadcaster Ibiyemi Olufowobi. Thank you, Ibiyemi, for joining us. Ibiyemi, can you hear us?
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I can hear you.
Having you join us. Now, we basically have been talking about, crimes against journalists, journalists being attacked and, shot at or killed or arrested and things like that. Just generally the threat to the safety of these journalists. Now, in time past and even till now, these attacks on journalists have become something that we are worried about, and it's unfortunate because now it's looking like people are now used to it. Sometimes a journalist just goes missing, and the next few days is found dead. No follow-ups whatsoever. Sometimes no compensation whatsoever to the families. A lot of things happening, and we don't know if enough is being done, especially by the lawmakers, to strengthen the laws that will protect journalists from all forms of threat and intimidation. What do you think is the way forward? What laws can be enacted or added to the bill to protect these journalists?
I think the laws should first start from in-house. We should first take care of ourselves before we ask government to enact laws to protect journalists. First of all, the media houses all over the country must ensure that journalists have a good insurance package. How many journalists in Nigeria today are insured? And when you don't have insurance, you don't have adequate insurance protection, then your life is, I'm struggling for the word to use. But aside that, after the media houses have provided an adequate insurance protection for their journalists, the next step is to now ask government to enact enabling laws to protect the journalists. And one of those laws, by the way, that one would expect the lawmakers to enact is to compel media houses to protect journalists, to compel media houses to protect journalists in their care, in their employ, by having accurate insurance protection for these people. I think that's the very first thing that we need to do.
Ibiyemi, it's good you brought that up, because my next question basically was also to come back onto the journalists and not just the outside community. Now, on the part of journalists, and Vincent, I'll bring this to you eventually as well. On the part of journalists, what do you think should be done to avoid being victims of violence, especially with regards to things like fake news and the likes, which spark violence in the society? And I'm saying this because about this time last year on this same program, we spoke to some journalists from Ghana who gave instances of how they have come to partner with forces like the Ghanaian police and try to see how they can reduce these kind of issues when it comes to clashing with security operatives. But we know that the journalists also themselves have their own role to play. So what do you think should be done by journalists to protect themselves? Again, particularly when it comes to things like fake news and the likes.
The very first thing the journalist is supposed to do is to act as a proper journalist. Who is a journalist in the first instance? Someone whose job is to collect news, write about it for newspapers, magazines, television, or radio. You are supposed to be objective. So the very first thing I tell colleagues is, one, do not get involved in their fights. Do your job sincerely as a journalist without any hidden interest. The moment you start getting involved in what you're not supposed to get involved in, the moment you start being partisan in your job as a journalist, then you are inviting trouble. The next step is ensure, especially this is for investigative journalists, let someone know where you are heading to. You are going for the scoop. Let someone know exactly who you are talking to, who you are meeting. It could be someone, maybe your partner, your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Just ensure that someone knows exactly whom you are meeting and when and where you are meeting this person. Do not become one of the statistics. A dead journalist serves no purpose other than being a part of the statistics. So you must first of all take care of yourself. Also, ensure you stay away as a journalist from sensationalism. Be truthful, be objective, criticize government, criticize the powers that be without being vicious. Be objective. If you are objective as a journalist, time with that number, and everyone knows that you are not one to pull people down unnecessarily, because I see fake news as an example of one of the tools used to pull people and governments down, and if you are not involved in that, if you make sure that your sources are genuine, your sources
Oh, Ibiyemi, since we're losing your audio, let me quickly move to Vincent. Vincent, could you also respond to this last question in 2 minutes, just before we go? How do you think journalists should be able to protect themselves as well, in terms like this, especially when we talk about things like fake news, so that they are away from violence? In 1 minute, please.
Yeah, so currently you find with the coming of the technology and the AI, the social media, they say that fake news travels 6 times than normal news. So in order for the journalists to be able to protect themselves, number one, they need to be able to verify the information before relaying it out. Because once you damage the reputation of an individual with fake news, it will be very difficult to be able to revert back. So they have to ensure that they verify the information before it's relayed out. And then the other thing, they need to be able to be very professional on how they conduct themselves. I know there are specific media houses that are owned by tycoons, so they dictate by what goes out. So in the process, you find they put also the lives of the journalists at risk. So as a professional journalist, you need to be able to ensure to be principled, you need to be able to uphold the ethics that is required, so that in case you are being forced to communicate in a certain way, the most honorable thing to do is to resign and go to the most independent and authoritative media house, because also the media owners play a critical role in ensuring that some of the journalists are put at risk. And lastly, I'll want, especially if the journalists are working on if they're working on an investigation, they need to work closely with the security agencies, because some of those cases are highly at risk. They involve a lot of risks and put their lives into danger. So there's need for them to work closely with the security agency, especially when they are following up on corruption, human rights violation cases. Thank you.
All right, Vincent, thank you so much for contributing to this particular topic. And we certainly do hope that eventually governments around the world will begin to put in more laws that will protect journalists, even as we, the journalists, find ways to protect ourselves. Thank you so much once again, Vincent. And thank you, Ibiyemi, for joining us on this.